welcome everybody to our second Live with the League in 2021. So as Kim said, I'd like to recognize the elected officials who are our public servants and who do our bidding for us. And looks like no one is on the chat, so I will give a nod to Councilmember Chris Kate for making time to be with us today. I really appreciate your including yourself in this opportunity to have this discussion about a really important piece of business that the city is moving forward with and needs public input on. So thank you, Councilmember Kate, for joining us today. I'd also like to take a moment to talk a little bit about our organization and some upcoming events for anyone who might be interested in joining us. As many of you know, the League of Women Voters is a nonprofit political organization. And as of this month, we are 101 years old. The 2020 was our 100th anniversary, our centennial anniversary, and we had so many fun events planned for the year, but kind of got changed up with the pandemic. So we're happy to be celebrating our 101st anniversary this month. I'd also like to call attention to an upcoming event on March 24th. It's called Equal Justice for Some, and we will have wrongly accused Gloria Killian come to talk to us about her life's work regarding the nightmare of wrongful criminal accusation and conviction and how it can happen to any of us and what happens within the system of our law enforcement and criminal justice systems once someone has been engaged in those systems. So that should be a very compelling conversation with her. Again, it's March 24th, 11:30. That'll be our next monthly Live with the League. And you will find information on that on our website and also on Eventbrite. So I invite you to attend or go to both of those places to look for it and to attend that upcoming event as well. One other thing I just want to update people on that the League does and that we're in the process of doing right now is we do something called program planning. And last month, or earlier this month, in fact, we hosted a program planning event here at our league, and other local leagues across the state of California did that as well, so that we could digest information as our membership and direct the activities of our state league board of directors and legislative advocates. So it's an opportunity for us as membership to come together and provide feedback to our leaders to try to give them some information on and insights on what is important to us and what issues we want to either maybe do a study for, do particular advocacy for, or emphasize in our legislative processes. So that was a meeting that we did for the state board of the league, but on March 13th, we're going to do that for our members here. So if you're a member of the league here, the local league, the League of Women Voters of San Diego, I invite you to make plans to attend that. It's your opportunity to vote. So you'll come to the meeting. We'll talk about issues that we might want to emphasize in our work going forward for the next year. We'll have opportunities for people to bring forward issues that they think is important or that we need to devote some time and resources on. So it's a really good opportunity for our members to engage with each other and give direction to the league leaders here in your league. We're a grassroots organization, as you all know, and we really rely on feedback from our members. So with that, I just want to get started here and let you all know that this event is being broadcast live by our radio partner, KNSJ 89.1. You can listen in your car by tuning to 89.1 or by using the TuneIn radio app. So with that, I'm ready to turn it back over and we can get started. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lori. Now for today's program, the city's franchise agreement with the SDG&E is ending and San Diego must decide its energy future. We'll look at who should own and operate our municipal power. I'd like to introduce our three speakers, starting with Mackenzie Elmer, who covers issues in the environment and energy for nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego. She got her start in journalism at the University of Iowa, where she helped start a nonprofit investigative outlet. She's a graduate of Scripps Institution of Oceanography's Climate Science and Policy Master's program. She previously worked for the Associated Press and the Des Moines Register. Derek Cassidy has worked as a journalist and as a California State Senate staffer. And he and his wife, Nancy, owned and operated Cassidy's Whole Foods Market in Encinitas. And for 20 years, they managed People's Organic Foods Market, a consumer cooperative in Ocean Beach. He is also a community organizer and activist in everything from peace, the nuclear freeze, light rail, and labeling organic foods to his present work advocating for a community-owned, profit-free public utility for San Diego. Since 2014, Councilmember Chris Cate has represented the 6th District of the City of San Diego, which includes the neighborhoods of Claremont Mesa, Kearny Mesa, Mira Mesa, Miramar, Park Village, and Sereno Valley. He chairs the Budget and Government Efficiency Committee and serves on the Environment Committee, the Rules Committee, and the Economic Development and Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Now we'll begin with Mackenzie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. I grew up putting stamps on lots of envelopes when my mom worked for League of Women Voters, so this is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to share now my presentation. I'm going to walk you through sort of the issue at hand here. Okay, so again, I'm the Environment and Natural Resources Reporter for Voice of San Diego, and today we are going to be talking about energy in San Diego and the decision about the franchise fee. So before we begin, let's just talk about energy in San Diego in general. So we're going to hear from two perspectives about who should provide the power to San Diego. One prefers a publicly run energy grid, and the other prefers a privately run energy grid. But as a journalist, I'm here to provide a balanced and unbiased explanation of the topic at hand. And so we're going to just first talk about what energy means in San Diego. So for your light to turn on, somebody needs to provide the power. They need to buy the power from a power plant or a generator, and somebody needs to build the energy grid to get it there. So the group that takes care of the first part, buying the power, is called San Diego Community Power. It's a publicly run power company, and it's run by a group of elected officials from the towns of San Diego, Chula Vista, Encinitas, La Mesa, and Imperial Beach. And they joined forces a few years ago because they were unsatisfied generally with how fast their citizens could transition to renewable energy. And so now they're in control starting this year, and they can choose to buy our power from more renewable energy generators or other power sources. But we're not actually worrying about who's buying the power today. I wanted to just make that distinction so we could transition to what we're actually focusing on, and that's building the grid. So currently, there's a private company owned by investors that builds our electric grid called San Diego Gas and Electric. And they've done so for over 100 years in San Diego. And that's because they've held really long contracts with the city of San Diego to do just that. So this is what we're talking about today. SDG&E's contract has expired, and the city is trying to figure out right now who to make the next contract with, or perhaps create an entirely new entity to do so. So they could give it to SDG&E again, or another company, or the city could decide to run the grid themselves. But we'll get into that in a minute. So the franchise fee, what is it? If a private company gets the contract to build the energy grid, they need to pay what's called a franchise fee. Basically, it's a fee the city charges for the rights to be the only and exclusive energy grid builder in the land. So think of City of San Diego as the landlord who owns the property where SDG&E wants to build. And if San Diego is the landlord, then SDG&E is the renter. They're paying the fee to be there. But with one very important distinction I wanted to make, it's actually you, the ratepayer, that's paying the rent, because in California, investor-owned utilities like SDG&E can pass those costs onto the ratepayer in form of increased rates. So, public, private, why should I care as a citizen? Here's three big reasons. The first one is your pocketbook. There's a lot of money to be made in building the energy grid and maintaining it, whether it's public or private. So as citizens, we need to be really watchful over whoever is in charge of that job and ensure that what we're paying for energy is fair. The second reason would be safety and security. Whoever runs the energy grid is responsible to prevent it from starting wildfires, for instance, and ensuring that it runs during a crisis or inclement weather. Think of Texas right now. and to protect it from foreign threats like hackers. And maintaining the grid is very costly, and already we're being charged billions more a year to protect it from just wildfires, for instance. And then the third reason is climate change. Climate change will make those first two bullet points a lot worse, because energy is only getting more expensive, and climate change will trigger more crises that we're going to have to deal with. So the choice before San Diego is to go private, have it run by one company or even two. One can own the electricity providing and one can own natural gas provision, or the public route. And this, which would mean that you could have the city run the department, run it as a department, I'm sorry, which is called municipalization, or you could have sort of a third party entity with an elected board of officials running it, kind of like San Diego Unified, which is a school board, or something like that. So there are pros and cons to both, and the speakers will probably lay those out for you, but just to give you some general ones. The pros and cons of going public could be putting local leaders in charge would make it easier for voters, for ratepayers to maybe have their voices heard, since you're just in closer proximity to those decision makers. Another thing that advocates would say about public power is that those profits that are made from the energy grid, which would normally go to an investor, can be reinvested into the community, perhaps to support the city's general fund or different programs or communities of concern. A con of going public would be your energy bills could become more political, in the sense that if you have local elected officials running the power company, there could be some decisions made just on energy to get reelected. They just have to be a lot more careful about how that is dealt with. And some pros and cons of going private. One pro would be there's already a state regulator in charge of keeping track of investor-owned utilities. You could just let the state do that job and keep it out of local politics. Utilities will also tell you that they probably provide better service because they've been doing it for 100 years or so. It's their grid, they know it, and then they are adding all the technologies that we need to keep track of wildfires, for instance. A con of going private could be that the public has no say in decision making. That's all up to the investors. Public doesn't really have a vote at the investor table, and so those profits are dealt with completely separately from what the public has to say. I wanted to note that there are some new trends that I actually wrote about in a story in this energy space. So franchise fee contracts are increasingly being seen by cities across the country as a way to ask energy companies that are private in their town for more things that they want. As these contracts come up for renegotiation, like right now in San Diego, other cities have done things like requiring their energy company to provide previously private energy data, to secure more renewable energy, to have a shorter term contract so that as the energy space changes, we get more solar, more technology, they can be more adaptable and ask for different things in just like a 5-year term contract. So who decides what happens next? Well, you do, sort of. Right now, because San Diego is a strong mayor system, Mayor Todd Gloria, as you see on the left, is the political leader, but also holds the checkbook. His office is also in charge of writing the final terms of whatever contract bid the city wants to put out, which right now, Mayor Todd Gloria's office is listening to public feedback and writing perhaps the terms that might go out in the next contract. But his office also has to grapple with city council, because it's the city council that eventually, by a 2/3 vote, will have to approve whatever decision is finally made on either a new franchise fee contract or whatever public power perhaps they might pursue, or decisions of that nature. So what you can do as a citizen in this space is basically bother your city council member or join an organization that supports the ideals that you have on this issue and make your voice be heard that way. And I just wanted to end with, I write a column every other week called the Environment Report, and you can subscribe to it. And I often write about this issue, and I will be soon, because It's coming actually before the City Council's Environment Committee at 1 p.m. tomorrow. And so you can follow that meeting and also follow me on social media here as well. So I will turn it back to our panel now.
Thank you very much, Mackenzie, for that overview of the situation. Next, we're going to go to Derek Cassidy. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Mackenzie. That was quite a complete report, and I appreciate it. I'm honored and grateful to be with you today to talk about profit-free public power. I thank everyone who helped organize today's meeting on this important issue, and I particularly commend the title of today's program, Power Struggle, for indeed, that's exactly what it is. By the way, there will be time for questions at the end, and I welcome any questions that you may have. You know, it's pretty simple. Our choice is between an investor-owned utility that takes $1 million a day in net profit out of San Diego every day, and a profit-free publicly owned utility that will keep that $1 million a day in our community. What are other differences between an investor-owned utility and a profit-free publicly owned utility? Well, an investor-owned utility is focused on maximizing profit for its stockholders, and a profit-free publicly owned utility is focused on serving its public owners, us, the ratepayers. And whereas an investor-owned utility is governed by a corporate board that is inaccessible to the ratepayers, a profit-free publicly owned utility is governed by a locally elected board of directors whose monthly meetings are open to everyone. So our choice is between an investor-owned utility that asks, how can we make more money? And a profit-free publicly owned utility that asks, how can we better serve the needs of the city? In order to make that $1 million a day every day that San Diego Gas and Electric charges, in order to make that $1 million a day every day, San Diego Gas and Electric charges us the highest electric rates in California. Meanwhile, our neighbors to the north in Los Angeles and Sacramento pay significantly lower rates, $70 to $100 per month lower, because their utilities are publicly owned and they don't pay huge profits to stockholders or high salaries to their executives. They join 42 other profit-free public utilities in California and more than 2,000 in the country. In order to have public power in San Diego, a public utility district would be formed. That would be the best way to do it, in our opinion, requiring the approval of San Diego voters in an election. All kinds of districts do the public's business already in our community, like our port, our schools, our water districts, and hospital districts. Our public electric and gas utility district would not be run by the city council. It would be an independent public district run by a board of directors elected by the San Diego voters in 5 different wards. The state law requires the city to be divided into different wards, and then people would run in each ward, 5 of them. Public utility districts are provided by law under the Municipal Utility District Act of the California Public Utilities Code. People ask, where would the money come from to buy out San Diego Gas and Electric's wires, poles, and pipes? The grid is already in place. San Diego Gas and Electric Company has created our local grid, and it's been there for at least 100 years. That's what the public utility district would buy out. And there have been estimates that that's worth $3 or $4 billion. You might think that's a lot of money, but the thing is, when you're getting profits of $365 million a year coming in to a public district, there's plenty of money to pay off the bonds. They'd be paid off over 30 years. And they'd be paid from the profits generated by the ratepayers, the same profits that currently are leaving our community to pay private stockholders. The subject of public power is not new in San Diego. The last time the franchise was considered in 1970, the city's consultant recommended that public power be pursued. But interest rates were high at the time, and the city leaders got convinced that the interest rates were too high to finance the purchasing of the San Diego gas and electric system, so they stayed with private power. Of course, that's not the case today because interest rates are at historically low rates. Last year, in considering the option of reviewing the current franchise, the city's consultant again advised San Diego to go to public power if the bids for the franchise were unresponsive. And recently, Mayor Todd Gloria deemed San Diego Gas and Electric's heavily redlined bid clearly unresponsive. San Diego Gas and Electric was the only bidder, and the mayor deemed their bid unresponsive. But then, even though he'd said that public power would be on the table, Mayor Gloria made it clear that he does not support going to public power. And consequently, the city council public forums that have been being held and are, I think there's a few left, and they are just focusing on creating a better franchise agreement. Right in the face of the fact that a great majority of the forum attendees, and I've attended about 7 forums, are advocating for public power. More people are advocating for public power in the forums than anything else. This begs the question of whether the thousands of dollars that San Diego Gas and Electric contributed to the mayor's campaign has had anything to do with his desire to negotiate another franchise agreement with them instead of going to public power. We, of course, can't know the answer to that. Critics of public power will point out that a public power district will pay no property taxes or state and federal income taxes. However, by not paying these taxes, the public utility will be able to do things like lower rates, create an equity fund, or invest in the city's climate action plan. Public utilities often contribute to the general funds of cities in amounts above what private utilities pay in franchise fees. Such matters would be a subject for consideration at the public meetings of the Public Utility Board of Directors. Speaking of the franchise fees, remember these fees are included in our utility bills and they come out of our pockets. We, the ratepayers, are the ones who pay the franchise fees to the city. And we are the ones who pay out the huge profits to San Diego Gas and Electric stockholders of $1 million a day. Public utilities do not let, private utilities do not let communities convert to public power without a huge fight. And I mean huge. After all, we're talking $365 million a year, plus increased annual profits of 8 to 10% per year historically, and even projected greater profits from the explosive growth in the use of electricity, which is soon to come. Thus, we're talking billions of dollars with which we could fund much needed public services and climate action instead of San Diego Gas and Electric's enormous profits and multi-million-dollar executive salaries. Communities where public utilities have replaced private utilities are full of stories about the questionable tactics that private utilities have used to hold on to their lucrative franchises. Indeed, there's actually a manual that investor-owned utilities use to wage their war on public utilities. For example, at this very moment, San Diego Gas and Electric is running PR ads everywhere, including on Saturday Night Live, praising the company for its boastful history of service to the community, contributions to community organizations, and commitment to a green future. However, we believe that when San Diego voters learn that our own investor-owned gas and electric utility charges us the highest rates in the state and thereby takes $1 million out of our economy every day. And when the voters learn that just as San Diego Gas and Electric failed to protect our backcountry from the devastating witch fire of '07 due to their refusing to spend the money to keep their power lines free of overgrowth, just as they failed to protect us back then, they are now saddling us with lawsuits in order to avoid spending the money to keep their infrastructure agreements with the city. Furthermore, when the voters learn that San Diego Gas and Electric has done everything it can to hinder the adoption of rooftop solar, and that their parent company Sempra uses their profits, meaning our money, to develop fossil fuel in the form of fracked gas, which they export all over the world for profit in the face of our existential climate crisis. And when the voters learn that public power utilities are alive and well throughout California, we believe that when San Diego voters learn and understand all these issues, they will join our effort to establish profit-free public power in San Diego. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. I appreciate your feedback and your insight into the very complicated situation that you laid out for us. I want to remind everyone to lodge their questions in our Q&A, and please try to form a question. Don't just make a statement. We'll be sharing these questions with our panelists at the end of these presentations. So it would be helpful for us all if you would pose an actual question in the Q&A and just post it there, and we'll go through them when the final presentations are over. And with that, I'd like to announce and bring forward our council member who's here to talk to us about this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm going to share my screen as well too for my presentation.
You're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM Descanso, serving the greater San Diego area. You can also listen in at knsj.org.
First of all, I want to thank the League and Mackenzie and Derek for your presentations as well too, and I appreciate being invited to discuss my point of view regarding this very important topic. There are three main reasons for my opposition to the city moving to municipalization of the delivery of electric and gas utilities to San Diegans. There will be a financial impact to San Diegans should we move in that direction. There will be a massive increase in liability for the city and thus taxpayers. And there is no guarantees or protections to the ratepayer with such a decision. There was a very preliminary analysis that was completed by city consultants, but in my opinion, the results of that analysis should heed caution to policymakers. The very first step in what would be the process of undergoing municipalization is understanding the cost to purchase the system. As of now, we have no clue what that is. The new gen study that was completed makes a series of basic assumptions to try and place a value on the assets. But there are already disputes regarding that analysis. The consultants did not conduct a fair market value analysis of the system, so as it stands, we don't know how many billions of dollars are going to be needed. Taking this a step further, we don't know how much it would cost to sever all the existing infrastructure from the rest of the jurisdictions. I'm going to bet, like any other major infrastructure project, that it will cost significantly more once we start the digging. From there, that would put into question any rate savings analysis that has been done. The MRW report notes that, quote, results and conclusions should be considered preliminary, end quote, and that, quote, MRW has had to make various simplifying assumptions that should be revisited, end quote. At this point, any final determination that makes a conclusive statement regarding any guarantees of feasibility or rate savings are premature. Lastly, the city relies heavily on franchise fee revenue from multiple entities to provide core city services to residents. According to our independent budget analysts, in fiscal year 2021, the adopted budget includes a total of $109.3 million attributable to franchise agreements with SDG&E. This does not include any upfront payments to the city via the minimum bid that would come from a new franchise agreement with any respondent to the upcoming invitation to bid, or ITB. Suffice it to say, with an $85 million budget deficit for this current year and a projected $150 million deficit next year, any loss of revenue will have a tremendous impact on our ability as a city to provide basic core services. I would guess that there is agreement that managing the electric and gas systems is extremely complex and full of risk. Our region's history of wildfires is just one example regarding the liability that would fall on the shoulders of city taxpayers should we take control over those systems. We'd also be liable for all of the maintenance of the infrastructure, which everyone knows is not an area our city has excelled in. You all may recall in the mid-2000s, the city entered into 2 consent decrees with the EPA regarding the requirement to make improvements to our sewer system to reduce sewage spills. This resulted in increases in our sewer rates to pay for those improvements. The backlog of our other infrastructure needs is well documented, totaling over $6 billion. Additionally, the problems that have plagued our ability to run our water system efficiently and effectively has been noted in multiple press accounts and even by our own independent city auditor. From overbilling to not reading meters or repairing or replacing basic infrastructure, city customers are rightly concerned about what they are getting for paying some of the highest water rates in the nation. Lastly, the CCA, San Diego Community Power, which was noted earlier, is beginning to deliver electric services to not only City of San Diego businesses, but also those within the cities of La Mesa, Imperial Beach, Encinitas, and Chula Vista. If the City of San Diego municipalizes, the chances are more likely than not that those remaining cities will be stuck holding the bag on any contracts that will be and or have been approved. This would put those ratepayers in a very precarious position. There have by no means been any legal opinions drafted on this issue, but this is a question that needs to be answered sooner rather than later. At the end of the day, everything falls back onto the ratepayers. If the funding for keeping up with the infrastructure is not maintained and appropriately allocated, which is what we have seen with the rest of our city's infrastructure, ratepayers will be charged even higher rates to make up the difference. As well, every analysis that has been conducted has used very basic assumptions. As has been noted by the consultants' reports, these cost assumptions contain, quote, significant uncertainty, end quote. And lastly, at a local level, there are no watchdogs to ensure the rates and charges that would be adopted by the council or any other governing body would be in the best interest of ratepayers. Even with any perceived problems at the CPUC, there are at least ratepayer advocates whose sole purpose is to ensure fairness. That is not the case at the local level. And with all due respect to my colleagues, myself included, we are by no means energy experts. In summary, municipalization is the wrong approach, but that does not mean we do not bring our strong negotiating tactics to the table with whomever bids on the upcoming ITB. A lot has changed over the last 50 years, and the city's interest does need to be protected. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We do have quite a few questions that have come rolling in here. So I'm going to start from the top here. Is San Diego's franchise agreement a means to leverage decarbonizing electricity? Derek, do you know the answer to that one?
Say that again, please.
Is San Diego's franchise agreement a means to leverage decarbonizing electricity?
No.
Mackenzie?
I would say that study that I mentioned by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, that whole study is about the fact that these franchise agreements can be used to secure more renewable energy from the private power company. That's being done in different cities across the country, like Boulder and Minneapolis.
I would say that with San Diego Community Power, that we're already on that approach, in that they already have a goal of 100% renewables by 2035, and they are already offering 100% clean renewables to the government customers that are coming online this year, then the business customers and the residents following in the following year.
I would just, sorry, I just wanted to add, I think there's an interesting question to be asked of if with that renewable energy coming through the San Diego Community Power, what changes will have to be made to the grid in order for that to be distributed to the rest of the city. And so there could be some infrastructure improvements that need to be made, which means the city would have to work with whoever is managing the grid.
Okay, Derek?
So a franchise agreement could be a way to decarbonize the future if the private utility had that as its goal. In San Diego Gas and Electric has underlined rooftop energy. Anybody that has rooftop solar will tell you that they're not getting paid the fair amount of the electricity they put back in the system. And recently, San Diego Gas and Electric went to the PUC to ask for a 12% rate decrease, thinking that if they lowered rates for a while, maybe people wouldn't sign up or stay signed up in community choice energy. The PUC turned them down on that. That was the first time they'd ever asked for a rate increase in their history. I mean, a rate decrease. So they had a little angle there. They were trying to undermine community choice energy. The San Diego Gas and Electric has done some good green things. They have out of Escondido, they have a nice battery storage system that they're working on, but it's not known around the town. Anybody that's paying attention to renewable energy does not think of San Diego Gas and Electric as a leader in the field. In contrast to that, in Sacramento, the public utility district up there is doing all kinds of renewable energy projects, including building a 6,000 acre solar farm right at the edge of town where their old nuclear power plant used to be.
Okay, well, that also brings up another question that was asked. How would municipalization affect people with solar panels and how that impacts rates paid? Derek? Well,
first of all, I want to make clear we're not talking about municipalization, those of us in my camp. We understand what Councilman Cates said about the water department of the city struggling at times and other management problems in the city. We're advocating, like in Sacramento, for a independent, separate public utility district, like a hospital district or a port district, run by an independent board of directors with no liability for the city. If this independent public utility gets in trouble, and by the way, it's just going to be in San Diego boundaries, so it's not going to have any not much fire problem, because it's not like way out in the fire areas. But this independent public utility district, like in Sacramento, will not create any liability for the city of San Diego, and it won't be run by the city of San Diego's people. It'll be run by independent, separate people, and the public power. There are big public power associations throughout California and the country, and when they find out that San Diego needs help in running a public power district, they're going to have all kinds of advice ready for San Diego in getting the people here. Actually, though, just remember, I don't know, 95% of the people at San Diego Gas and Electric are going to work in the public power district. We're not going to, I don't know how many people are at San Diego Gas and Electric, 4,000 or 5,000, I think. We're not going to lay those people all off. They're going to end up in the public power district. It's just we're going to be minus the $17 million a year CEO of the thing, because public power CEOs make about $560,000 a year, in contrast to the $17 million a year that the head of Sempra makes.
Thank you, Derek. Do either of the other panelists want to allude to that, or should we move to our next question? Okay, well, the next question is somewhat related to that, and it regards what you actually brought forward, Derek, in your presentation regarding the costs associated with your plan and how those monies would be raised. I think you mentioned bonds, et cetera. And so that's one of the questions here that we have. Just the infrastructure of the financing of the program that you're mentioning, Derek. Could you give us a little bit of detail about whether or not it's going to be bonds and how those bonds would be initiated, et cetera?
They're called revenue electric bonds. They're very common. There's nothing new about bonds. They do not get to be interest-free, however. In the bonds that go to buy San Diego Gas and Electric system do not get to be interest-free revenue. I mean, public municipal utility bonds or municipal bonds. They have to pay interest, but bonding is not, there's nothing mysterious about bonds. They're sold in New York City. The proceeds come to the district that's selling the bonds, and the district pays them off over 30 years. This district that we're talking about is going to have $365 million a year to start. That usually goes out of San Diego at $1 million a day. And then they're going to have the fact that they don't pay any taxes. So they're going to have a big pot of money. I'm not a bond expert, but if you ask somebody, what are the payments on $3 or $4 billion worth of bonds or $5 billion worth of bonds? They can tell you, but I guarantee you it's not $365 million a year. It's 30 years of payments. And so there's plenty of money to do this. And as soon as a district is formed by the voters, the bond people in New York know that that district has behind it all the ratepayers and all the revenue that those ratepayers pay forever. So the bond guys in New York say, well, no problem loaning that outfit money. They've got whatever it is, number of ratepayers to pay the payments. So they don't even give it another thought. As soon as they hear it's a public power district, the bond money flows from New York, and the investors in those bonds are happy to have those bonds.
May I respond?
Sure, please do.
Part of what has been discussed is that we don't have any idea what that starting cost would be, not only to acquire the system, but also to sever the city from the rest of the grid. And I don't think that can be understated, is that if this were to change and we were to municipalize, we would literally have to dig into the system and sever our grid separate from the rest of the grid outside city boundaries. And the cost of that is unknown. We have no idea how much that's going to cost, but I'm assuming it's probably going to be a lot. And thus, what Derek mentioned about all the folks who sell bonds is that they do understand that ratepayer is the one backing this. So for whatever reason, there is not the money there by the current rates to sufficiently pay either the debts or the cost of managing the grid, making improvements, purchasing the gas or electricity. That would all fall back onto ratepayers, and we would have to raise rates in order to recover that. So that is the risk that is associated with this.
Anybody else?
I just
Yes.
wanted to point out, I maybe ask Councilman Kate for a clarification, but when we say the city has no idea what that will cost, I mean, isn't that because, or don't you mean because the city would have to basically negotiate with SDG&E on a price that they will sell the equipment for? And obviously that's their entire business in the city. So what are your concerns about that kind of negotiation? I mean, could you bring like more transparency to that negotiation, and there's pressure publicly to be put that way? Or
yeah, that's part of the cost is to acquire the system, and the separate cost is to sever the system. Just based off experience of what's happening in a place like Boulder or Pueblo and how long that is taking, absolutely, we have no idea how long it's going to take or what that cost is. So like any negotiation, you need a willing seller and a willing buyer. And there's going to be some, I would imagine, difficulty in getting that point if that's the decision by us as a council. And so we're going to have to take that into account of what that cost will be in order to purchase the system. But I'm pretty sure that it's going to be very much more expensive than what has already been outlined with the new gen study.
So to say we have no idea what the costs are going to be, to get ready for this meeting today, I reread the consultant's report that the city paid $1 million for a while back in preparation for the fact that they knew the franchise was coming to an end. You should see this report. It's remarkable. It tells, for instance, it goes into the cost of buying out the San Diego Gas and Electric system. Now, it doesn't mean that San Diego Gas and Electric will agree to that, but they have 3 methods. They actually go into 3 methods of determining the cost. And remember, this is not going to be the city council's job. The city council is not going to be negotiating this sale by San Diego Gas and Electric. It's going to be the CEO and his staff of the public utility district. That's who's going to negotiate with San Diego Gas and Electric. And you know, these kind of things are done all the time. When you build freeways, when you build the bullet train from Northern California to Southern California, you go through the Central Valley, and these farmers all, you know, they come in and they say, well, you're not taking my land for that train. And then they go into court, and by golly, a judge decides what's going to be the price of that land that the train has to have to go through. So ultimately, the leaders of the public utility district will be negotiating with San Diego Gas and Electric. It could be strung out. One of the things that they do, oftentimes, you should hear the horror stories of what the gas and electric company can do to string it out. And you never know if that's going to happen. But I'll tell you, we do know a lot. We know something about what the price should be and and that's in the consultant's report. You can reread that and see what the consultant said. He's talking somewhere in the neighborhood 3 to 4 billion. And that sounds like a lot of money to people. It is, but it's also a huge number of ratepayers paying electric bills every single month. And that's a $1 billion business. And everybody knows in business that if you have to pay something to get into business, you expect to have costs to get in. And that's the bond cost that the public utility district is going to have to pay to get into this business. And everybody knows that there's enough money in the business to pay the expenses.
All right, thank you. Thanks for those answers. We have about 40 other questions that we're going to try to get through today. So Kim, you want to take the next?
Yeah, so several of the questions we received referenced what happened in Texas last week. And they're asking, how would the public power company be monitored to prevent those kind of faults? Or who would regulate a publicly owned utility? Would it be the CPUC?
It is not the
Anyone?
PUC. The PUC does not regulate public utility districts. They only regulate investor-owned utilities. Actually, that's not quite true. The PUC has a say over the safety of public utility districts. But the main regulation of a public utility district is the California Public Utilities Code. If you go look at the code, there's all kinds of stuff in the code that tell public utility districts what they have to do. They have to have accountants, they have to have annual reports, on and on. They have to have if they want to have a little slush fund, or what do you call it, when a general manager can spend a few dollars on his own without talking to the board. They name the little, I can't remember what you call that, but anyway, it's a little fund that a general manager can have to spend things on his own, maybe, I don't know, $1,000 or something. Anyway, all those details are in the Public Utilities Code of California. And don't forget, there's a public board meeting every single month. So people hear that something is not copacetic, so they go down to the board and raise questions. And then pretty soon, one board member is shown to be not paying attention to business, and that board member gets de-elected in the next cycle. So you have all kinds of public local control and transparency that we don't have with San Diego Gas and Electric. We have no idea what they're doing and where they're putting their money. I mean, they do, San Diego Gas and Electric, in fairness, they do put about $14 million into the city every year into nonprofit groups. And that's very helpful, you know, and everybody has to acknowledge that that is a good thing. But that kind of money, $14 to $15 million, is easily available with a public utility.
All right. I think Councilmember Kate wanted to pop in. So
yes.
The short answer is politicians.
Would you like to expound on that?
I in my presentation, the PUC would have no oversight over the entity. It would all come down to a governing board elected by representatives, whether it's us as a city, which was one option that Mackenzie outlined in her presentation. It could be the council who manages this, or it could be a separate board, either or. It's gonna be managed by people who you elect, politicians who will manage the system. That's who will oversee all of this, which
We just want a separate.
you could like or not.
We want a separate board, Chris, and I have nothing. The San Diego City Council is not anything I criticize. I've been here a long time, and I support the City Council of San Diego.
I thank you for that, sir.
I'm happy with the San Diego City Council, but we'd like, it's a big business. The public utility. I mean, this gas and electric business is about, I believe it's around $4 billion a year, and the city of San Diego's general fund is about, I don't know, $1.5 billion, something like that. So this is a bigger business than the city of San Diego, and I don't think it should be imposed on city council people who ran with the idea they were going to manage a $1.4 billion business, which they knew quite a bit about, and public utility and gas electric business they knew nothing about. So it needs to be, like in Sacramento, a separate entity, and I just think that's the safest way to do it. I first learned about public utilities when I lived in Sacramento for 10 years. My wife and I moved up there from San Diego to work for Senator Jim Mills of San Diego, the president pro tem of the Senate. And we learned about the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and it was impressive.
Back to the framework of this question, because as Kim said, we have several questions regarding this, how this might compare with or contrast with the situation in Texas. Councilmember Kate has mentioned severing us from the grid as it exists. And so there are some questions about what that process would look like and what that would mean to us. But in particular, several questions have come in regarding how rates would be different and how ratepayers would be affected with one versus the other. So, back to I think there was some price gouging or some nefarious type of monetary or financial gains going on in Texas. I mean, I guess that story is still unfolding, but again, to Kim's point, can any of you give a little bit more detail about how it would be, ratepayers would be affected?
Well, essentially, I mean, the ratepayers are the backstop to anything, whether it's an IOU or a municipalized entity. So essentially what you're relying on, should we go to municipalization, is that entity doing all of the maintenance and the upkeep of the grid to prevent something like what happened in Texas from happening here. But at the end of the day, it would be incumbent upon the ratepayers to pay for any liability that does exist should something, a natural disaster or something else, occur, similar to what we do with our water and sewer now. If we as a city are not investing ratepayer funds when it comes to our water infrastructure, which I think we're all going to hear about later this year, of how much we're going to need to upkeep our reservoirs and our dam, San Vicente, et cetera, we as ratepayers are going to be asked to pay higher rates to pay for those improvements. So I think it's similar in nature in that respect to the water and sewer infrastructure that we have currently today.
I would just add, I would just add that I think there's some differences in the way that how rates can be used and in this context. And one big criticism from public power advocates that I've heard is that investor-owned utilities like San Diego Gas and Electric, they're guaranteed a rate of return on anything that they build. So right now it's about 10% rate of return on any kind of infrastructure that SDG&E wants to add. That includes like hardening of the grid, which is essentially like taking a wooden pole and making it a concrete pole to prevent wildfires from sparking. And there's like a multi-billion-dollar plan that's already been approved by the CPUC for SDG&E to start making those infrastructure improvements, and they get a 10% rate of return on any of that spend. And that that cost is passed on to the ratepayers. So there's an argument to be made about, you know, if it were publicly owned or municipally owned, that 10% rate of return would not be there for ratepayers to incur. And I think when I read the reports from the consultants the city hired, I think one of them mentioned that eventually they predict rates would be lower under a publicly or municipally run power company. It's just, it's very unclear, like Councilman Kate said, about that, all that upfront cost of negotiating with the power company to basically get rid of their business here.
Well, that leads into our next question, because a lot of people asked, and they mentioned that Councilmember Kate said, we just don't know the cost of certain things, or is there some consultant's report on the franchise agreement available? And Yvonne asked if we could negotiate a short-term franchise agreement, allowing the city time over that term to complete an in-depth study as to the cost of converting to a municipal power district.
So there are reports, and I recommend folks read them. They're very complex, and the New Gen report, and there were other sub-consultants, MRW, Vision did the severance study. So there are a number of studies that have been conducted to try to place a price on everything. But you will note in their footnotes and the assumptions they made, they speak and they say that these are very preliminary, very simplistic assumptions have been made on this, and they haven't done the in-depth idea on this. There is an argument to maybe to have a shorter franchise just in general, because times change. Obviously, where we are today is nowhere near where we were back in 1970 when we last did our franchise agreement 50 years ago. So I think there is an argument to be made that franchise agreements in general should be shorter periods of time, so that you can have balance the stability of having a provider in, plus being able to negotiate or make amendments to the franchise agreements when things change and circumstances change. And that's always something different. Obviously, 50 years ago, we never imagined that pure water would be a possibility. That wasn't in the cards 50 years ago. So I think there is a healthy balance in there, which I think, in my opinion, that we're trying to get to. So I don't believe a 5-year franchise is worthwhile, but I also don't believe 50 years is worthwhile either. So there is a balance to be made in that.
Thank you for that, Councilman Kate, because some of us think if we have to have a franchise, a 3-year would be really the best. That's what we would want, with an off-ramp, so that at the end of 3 years, there's what they call an off-ramp, which allows the city, the San Diego Gas and Electric, it allows them to take the off-ramp and go into public power. So that would be beneficial. The current franchise agreement, by the way, the one that was made in 1970, 50 years ago, has an off-ramp in it. It has a place where where the whole thing could go into public power. So we would like that. If we had to have another franchise. We do understand time is going to be taken. In 1970, when the franchise was being renegotiated, it expired, and they were negotiating the fee, the annual fee that the gas and electric company pays, the franchise fee, and they took 1.5 years, I think, or 2 years beyond the expiration of the franchise. So it is true that the city can let the franchise, well, we've already let the franchise expire. We've now extended it to June 1st. We could extend it another couple of years, and San Diego Gas and Electric has to continue keeping the lights on while we work on whatever we want to work on. Now, if San Diego Gas and Electric has hinted that maybe they wouldn't pay the franchise fee if we tried to extend it too far, well, then they'd be trespassing, because their franchise fee is a fee they pay for the rent of the land that they've got their poles and pipes and wires on. So if they quit paying the rent, we could go into court and charge them with trespassing. So I don't think they'll really do that. They sort of hint that they might, but that would be I think they'd lose that argument, because the law allows the city to extend this franchise agreement as long as they need to have. But of course, the other thing is we are going to need a vote to create a new district. And that vote is, I would say, should be in 2022 when we have our next election, so we don't have the expense of a special election. But there is a provision in the California law for a special election if we could get it together really quick.
That's true. And we are going to have a special election April 6th. So everybody mark your calendars and be prepared for that if you're Assembly District 79, because as Derek just mentioned, we do conduct special elections. So that could be an option. But I think Councilmember Kate had some response.
Yes, thank you. I agree with you that if the franchise were to expire for whatever reason, that SDG&E is required to keep the lights on. I do believe that your notion that they're trespassing and whatnot is an oversimplification of the law, and we've had our city attorney opinion on this. In order to extend the franchise and be able to collect revenue, and for SDG&E to be able to collect revenue that is then passed on to us, there has to be mutual agreement on both sides. So while our franchise agreement did expire in January, there was a mutual negotiation and agreement to extend to June. Now, if SDG does not agree to extend anything beyond that, that is a loss of revenue that we would experience as a city, because SDG would not be allowed to collect revenue from customers to then pay us as a city, which goes back to my earlier point about our reliance on franchise fee revenue as a city to provide services. So I just do take exception with the oversimplification of that. It's a lot more legal entailments if we were to try to go it alone without agreements from SDG&E on the length of term on this current extension.
I would agree we shouldn't go it alone, but I think they are bluffing a little when they say they might not agree to an extension, and therefore we would not get the franchise fee. We could test them. We could find out if they're really going to do that. And then we could think about what the PUC would say about that and what a court would say about that. But that's a big mess. I don't think I'm not in favor of doing that kind of thing. So the main thing is that we just need to know that for my money, we need to know that ultimately we need a public power district.
All right, thank you. Here's another question that seems to be, I think it's very important. It just is a little bit different from the questions we've had before. So it is essentially asking why Councilmember Kate has a position different from and is presenting an opinion different from Derek Cassidy. And I just want to frame this whole thing for our attendees today. So the purpose of this event is to provide you with two sides of this story. So the pros and cons of public and private. And I think Mackenzie did a great job at the beginning, trying to frame that and pull together the general overview about what we were going to discuss today. But if any of you joined a little bit late and you're wondering what we're talking about and why, we specifically found individuals who represent
I think Lori's frozen up.
Articulate and educated and informed about way that would enlighten us.
All right, I'm going to bring us another question. Someone asked, would natural gas be included, or is this just for electricity?
It's for both.
Okay. That was quick and easy.
I just want to mention that natural gas, sorry, just because this is important. In California, especially here, natural gas powers a lot of the electricity in the power plants. Like a lot of the power plants provide electricity are powered by natural gas. So you get natural gas in your cook stove to power your flame, but it's also very much a part of the light bulb that you turn on as well.
Okay, that's good to know. So another question, what is the approximate time the city would need to determine costs for taking over the power grid and raising the money for purchasing the grid, and thus the amount of time the city would need for an interim agreement with SDG&E? Derek, I think you said that we would need an election and that would be cheapest to do in November 2022, right?
Correct. Although Lori said that I didn't realize there's an election coming up. Well, I didn't know if election out in the 79th district could be held for forming a public power district in San Diego. Maybe it could. Maybe that election is going to be
Well, it wouldn't be for all of the city of San Diego.
okay.
It's only for the one assembly district.
So then we should do 2022 because I'm not in favor of a special election. It costs too much money, and the state law says if you do a special election, it has to be paid for by the property tax owners. A little bit of money goes on every property tax bill to pay for the special election under state law.
I will just note that that has nothing to do with actually acquiring the system, the grid. That process could take years. And in fact, Boulder, it's taken 10 years and they're still not to that point yet. So there is no clear answer how long it would take to go through that process.
What exactly is the process? Maybe that's part of the confusion here. So what is the process and the steps that have to take place?
So what Derek is talking about is actually just forming an entity to begin that process. But then there's the actual acquisition, acquiring the grid, the rights to the grid. We would have to undertake that negotiation with SDG&E to acquire their assets. And then we would have to sever the acquired assets away from the rest of the system that they manage for other cities in the county. So we have boundaries in the city of San Diego. We would have to sever at those points our now newly acquired assets from their assets that they have. So you have to negotiate first, acquire it, then sever, and then move forward, where we have no idea how long that would take.
Well, let me say a thing about that. If we have the election has two questions. Should San Diego form a public power district? And then the second question is, should these people be elected in 5 wards of the new district? So there's 5 wards, anybody can run, whoever gets the most votes wins. Once the election is over, the 5 ward electees, the directors of the new district, they get together and they elect a chairperson of the board and a vice chairperson of the board. Then the word goes out that San Diego has a new district, and the American Public Power Association in Washington and the California Public Utility or Municipal Utilities Association in Sacramento immediately start putting the word out on their network that San Diego's looking for people to form this new district. So there needs to be a CEO quickly. Now, San Diego Gas Electric has a lot of qualified people. So some of them would make it known that they would be willing to work for the new district. So there'd be plenty of people and qualified people who would know how to start the business going under the elected board that the people just elected. And there'd be a CEO and there'd be an assistant CEO and there'd be all kinds of people. I mean, this is not really a hard thing to do in terms of concept, but it would take some coordination, of course, but it's been done. 2,000 districts have been created in America, 44 in California, 42, including out in Imperial Valley. The Imperial Valley Irrigation District is a public district, and they run the irrigation system of out there. I mean, they probably have a junior guy who's right behind the CEO who'd love to leave out there and come over to San Diego and work in a new big public power. So this is just going to be an exciting thing, I'll tell you, when it gets going. And all kinds of people are going to want to help.
We have a question regarding the profits and their uses of private versus public power. So in particular, would a public controlled utility be willing to invest in new power plants? Like, what is their obligation to use their funds? Or is there an obligation versus the obligation of the uses of profits that a private utility company would be using?
A public power company is in the business. They're in business to provide the electric and gas power to San Diego. By the way, they're going to use community choice energy to do whatever they do in bringing in renewable energy. So they're going to take advantage of that. And then they're going to buy other stuff. And all kinds of public power companies around the country and around California are going to get in touch with them and say, here's how we can help. That's one thing that public power companies do. It's a network, and they all help each other, as opposed to investor-owned utilities who are all competing with each other and, you know, do not, sometimes they help. I shouldn't say that they don't ever, but the public power community is a way more cooperative community than the investor-owned utility community. And the public power company can use its funds to, these days, nobody's going to build new gas-fired or nuclear power plants or oil-fired power plants or coal plants. Everybody now is thinking about building renewable energy sources. So that means wind turbines, that means rooftop solar over parking lots and homes. That means even desert centralized solar power plants. So all that's what's coming down the road.
Or was the question about what happens with profit? Can you?
There's no profit. There's no profit in a public utility.
Well, the question was essentially about what is the obligation of a public utility versus a private utility to reinvest in a community, or spend funds on infrastructure and communities, et cetera.
So I laid this out in a story back in December, kind of exploring what public power would mean. And I think this just goes back to the distinction that San Diego Gas and Electric, an investor-owned utility, again, gets that 10% rate of return they get on anything they build. So that that's their profit that the investors and the business take back into itself. Whereas a publicly run or municipally run power company is not allowed. They can't do that. They can't make a profit off of the things that they build. In exchange, they get these tax breaks. They don't have to pay the federal or the state income taxes, as I laid on this story, which I can share a link to later. But so that's kind of the distinction about where that money goes. I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, Kenzie, thank you for bringing that up. When San Diego Gas and Electric builds a Sunrise Power Link, you know, it costs $1 billion, let's say. They spend the $1 billion, and then the CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, says yes, and you can take 10% of that $1 billion and add it to the rates in your area to get your 10% on top of what you spent. So that's every time San Diego Gas and Electric builds something, and they have an incentive to build a lot because they get 10% profit on everything they build. A public utility district builds something because they think it's needed. Sacramento Utility District is building a 6,000 acre solar farm at the edge of Sacramento. Whatever they're putting out on that, they're putting out a certain amount of money to build that. They don't get 10% on top for their profit because they don't make a profit. So the public utilities do not make profits. They just make enough money off the ratepayers to keep everything going, to take care of their operating expenses.
Kate, did you want to respond?
Yeah. To the question and the obligation. So the obligation of the entity would be to meet the demands of the ratepayers and what's required. So the
That's
rates
right.
that will be paid for would have to cover that. Now, that could mean having to raise the rates to be able to make those purchases, make those infrastructure improvements. So I with a smaller group of people providing that funding for those infrastructures, that the cost of those things is spread amongst a smaller population as opposed to a larger population, which means those things cost more, which is, if you look at the CCA, for example, the reason why these smaller cities like La Mesa or Imperial Beach or others want to come with San Diego is the power of the purchasing power that San Diego brings to it. If they were going on their own to be able to pay for those renewable projects and the like, it would cost them that much more. That same thesis applies to San Diego if we're to be on our own, separate from the rest of the county.
Mackenzie?
Well, I didn't want to, you're in charge of asking the questions. The league is, not me, but I can't resist. I did see, I just wondered, Councilman Kate, is there any discussion of San Diego, in other interest from other cities or the county in joining a push for public or municipally owned power so you don't have to stand alone in the negotiations?
I don't know, and that goes to my earlier question of what the impact would be on the CCA, on San Diego Community Power. I think that is a question that I tried to pose at our council meeting on Monday to San Diego Community Power, is have they done that analysis? If San Diego were to municipalize, what impact that would have on the other 4 cities who joined with us in their CCA. I mean, you already have them starting to provide energy to government entities, businesses later this year, commercial industrial customers later this year, and residential customers next year. They're well on their way to starting. They're already signing contracts and the like. What would happen if San Diego went down this path to municipalize? You know, we'd be taken care of, obviously, as a city, but the other entities are not. And how is that going to work? I have not had any conversations with anybody on public power, and probably because my position on public power is known, so I'm probably not getting those phone calls.
I believe it'd be just like it is now. We have community choice energy functioning, and when they buy stuff, it has to be distributed by San Diego Gas and Electric. That's the way it works. If community choice energy can go out and find some low-priced renewable energy, wind, solar, hydroelectric, they bring it in, and San Diego Gas and Electric has to distribute it. If there's an independent public utility district operating, community choice energy does the same thing. They find some good renewable energy, they bring it in, and the community of the public power district has to distribute it because they now own the poles and the lines and the pipes of San Diego Gas and Electric.
The big difference is, though, we would only own that infrastructure within our city boundaries. We would not own the infrastructure in Chula Vista, La Mesa, Imperial Beach, and Encinitas. We don't own that infrastructure.
That's right.
So the concern is that if San Diego severs from the rest, I mean, it's the same grid covering all of the cities, but if you take over just your portion, the concern is that SDG&E's costs will be greater for the rest of the cities. Like, they're going to have to pay for maintaining the grid under SDG&E's cost structure, right? Or
correct. And likewise, the inverse of that is that our grid that we own is also going to be divided amongst only the 1.3 million people who live in San Diego versus the 3.2 million people who live in the entire county.
But then you wouldn't be responsible for the costs of wildfire mitigation out in the more rural districts, or has there been a cost analysis of?
Not that I'm aware, but also the maintenance of the infrastructure, though, is also spread amongst only San Diego residents as well, too. And the expectation that we would also maintain our own infrastructure, which, as I pointed out, whether it's water or sewer or the like, we're not the best at that. So that's the cost burden would be shifted to us alone as well, too.
There's a good discussion in the consultants report, the most recent consultants report that the city paid $1 million for about a year or so ago, that talks about the severance of the city grid from the surrounding areas. That's something everybody knows how to do. They know the prices were listed in the consultants report. They may not be 100% exactly right, but some very knowledgeable people. One of the guys in the consultants report is a former executive of Pacific Gas and Electric, and he certainly knows the business, and he and his staff applied their knowledge to what it costs to sever San Diego from the rest of the county. San Diego Gas and Electric not only does San Diego City, but it does everything all around the county and all up to Riverside County. So that all of that system will still be under San Diego Gas and Electric. So, you know, that they get to run that, and we get to run our public power district, and it's not rocket science on how you do that. It's been done in many places.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So I'll ask this one. If we did move forward with an investor-owned utility, is there a world in which the public voice could be represented at the investor level somehow?
No, not at the investors level. The public utility districts don't invest. And I mean, yeah, public utility districts like Sacramento, they don't invest in the stock market or the bond market or anything like that. They just pay attention to the business that they're running. They look at the revenues that are coming in. They look at their expenses. The revenues have to cover the expenses, and it has to even out. And that's it. There's no extra lying around. Well, they have a rainy day fund probably, but
I think the question was actually if we did move forward with SDG&E, then is there a way that there could be more of a public voice represented with that organization?
We should ask them.
yeah, you'd have
Part of the negotiations.
yeah, you'd have to see. I mean, people do go to stockholders meetings. You know, if you're a stockholder, you can go to the stockholders meeting.
You can listen to the investor calls. They're public and online.
That's tomorrow, by the way. That's true. The investor calls, and tomorrow, Mackenzie, is the, what do you call it when they make their annual money?
Quarter four.
Quarter four.
I think it's Q4, their investor call, yeah. And well, tomorrow, again, for people who are late, the City Council Environment Committee is discussing this, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know.
There is a presentation tomorrow
Yes.
From the American Public Power Association regarding municipalization.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, where's that, Chris?
That's at our Environment Committee meeting tomorrow, 1 p.m.
I think
Is
this
that
is
right?
right.
Correct.
Is that going to be Ursula Schreiber? Do you know?
I don't know.
Which you
All right,
guys,
it's on our agenda online. You can click on our agenda.
Put the link in the chat for that
Yeah.
agenda and to connect to the meeting as well.
wow.
There are a couple of questions that have a similar theme, and it would be a nice way to kind of wrap this up, perhaps, if we could get some examples of what we're talking about here and how they've rolled out in other places. So, for example, this question is echoed in several other questions. How old are the PUDs we're looking at for comparisons? Can you give an example of a community that has recently formed a PUD? An example of one that included takeover of part of an IOU built grid. So is there anything else that we're looking at by comparison, Mackenzie?
Well, I'll just say the ones that Derek is mentioning, Sacramento, they have been a public utility since 1923, I think, which is about the same time frame that San Diego first signed a franchise agreement with San Diego Gas and Electric. So a lot of the transitions have happened many, many years ago, and it does happen. I believe there's some more on that National Renewable Energy Laboratory report that I can share later. But like, for instance, Boulder had been working on this issue since like 2011. They were trying to form one, and they spent time studying it and money and extending the agreement. And eventually, actually, they recently just signed a new contract with their private power provider. But I think one important thing that is kind of missed in the conversation is these franchise fee agreement negotiations and this idea of public power municipalization. It can also be used as a tool for leverage to, if a city's looking at public power, it could kind of maybe make the private utility shake in its boots a bit and be a tool at the negotiation table for a city to get a better franchise agreement or something like that. That's one option. So
under the law, the Public Utilities Code, a way to get the election to happen and let the people decide what's going to happen is a resolution has to be passed by half of the legislative bodies in San Diego. So whoever's the legislative bodies, that'd be the city, the county, the port district, and whoever, those legislative bodies, if half of them make a resolution to that public power could be in the interest of the city of San Diego, they send that to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors is required to put on an election and divide the city into 5 wards and then hold the election. 2 questions: should these people be elected if the people say we should have a public utility district? So then that's what happens if we go that way. If we don't, well, we'll just go as we have been for 100 years.
All right, we have one last question. Doesn't the state of California have public obligations to protect public trust assets under the California Public Trust Doctrine? Wouldn't this historic and vital legal framework have some relevance to responsible utility management?
I have no idea.
That was a lawyer, someone who wrote that.
I don't know.
They stumped us. I can't believe
Good
it.
question. I will look into that.
That's over my
Thank you.
pay grade.
Well, I guess that's a good question to end on. So we're all in agreement that we know no one here knows. So I want to thank all of our panelists. I truly appreciate your time today and your expertise. I think you've given us all a lot to think about, and you've been gracious in your explanations and patient with the questions. I know that it's a difficult conversation to have sometimes because it's just very complicated, and it includes public and private considerations and financial considerations and civic considerations and environmental considerations. So it's really complicated. And again, I appreciate our panelists' time and expertise here today. I'd also like to thank all of the attendees for your time and attention and your civic engagement and consideration of this important topic. You attendees will be getting a survey, a link for the survey that you can give us your feedback about this event, and it'll help us improve the way we provide information and education to our community. So with that, I'd like to wish you all a very happy Wednesday, and thank you again for attending, and go enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks all.
Thank you,
Thank you
Laura.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.